Today's Thinking Thursday is going to be very different because I am, for the first time, trying out using a tripod. And because I don't have time to do things, you're going to have to come with me while I'm on the way to places. So I apologize if there's background noise, and I apologize that I'm doing this essentially as an experiment. But I'm a busy lady and needs must. So today's Thinking Thursday is going to be about Black Agnes. So that is an entire misnomer because she was not black. She was kind of Mediterranean looking for a Scotswoman. So relative to her circumstances, I guess so, but also no. So she was Agnes Randolph of the Randolph family. So she was the daughter of Thomas Randolph and Isabel Stewart of like Bonkill, like the Stewarts of Bonkill. So she came from kind of like a fancy family, and then she married fancy too. But she married when she was 12. She was 12. I'm amazed that there's no reference to this in history. No one has just like pieced that together. That she was born in 1312 and she married Dunbar, Patrick the 9th Earl of Dunbar and March. She married him in 1324, which meant that she married him when she was 12. Not great. They were kind of busy securing Scotland because they were in the second independence of Scotland and Scotland v England, that giant football match that was going on. No, they were kind of securing the independence of Scotland. So like 6 years after they got married, after she and her hubby Patrick got married, they were in the second siege. They were in the second war of independence for Scotland. So at the time, they'd only just the heat was on. They were still kind of feeling like, yeah, we need to shore up our lands. And Patrick Dunbar had a whopping great big castle. So she was put into the massive castle. And when he was off sieging and fighting and well, he was mostly just defending, really. Her hubby was a real Scots earl who was just trying to defend his lands against the English, really. But when he was off doing his defendings, as her family had done, her dad had been defending the Scots lands against the English, and basically when the 9th Earl of Dunbar, her hubby Patrick, was off doing that, she stood in defence. And it was quite normal at the time for the ladies of these castles in Scotland and the lady of the house to take over. That was quite normal in Scotland. So it wasn't seen as like weird that this young lady, this young countess, was taking charge. And she did a fantastic job. Quite a historically excellent job of taking charge, because William Montagu, who was on the English side and who was fighting on behalf of King Edward, so basically King Edward in Scotland was trying to dethrone David II in Scotland. He was like, I'll have that, and David was like, no you won't. And so part of his kind of fighting to take over Scotland was these little sieges, including the siege of Dunbar Castle, where Agnes was because her hubby was off doing some fighting. And so when William Montagu showed up, she was like looking literally over the ramparts at him like, you can fake right off. No, I think she looked over the ramparts. It was just like, well, it's actually been suggested by historian Nigel Tranter that it was on purpose, that she was like, let me be besieged so that I can buy time for the kind of the Scots to ensconce themselves into a better position to defend themselves against the English. So it has been suggested that she was very cunning in allowing herself to be besieged. So basically, William Montagu showed up on the 13th of January in 1338, and he said, "Give me your house." And she stood there on her ramparts and gave an excellent Scottish, "No, I shan't." And she said, "Of Scotland's king I had my house, I pay him meat and fee, and I will keep my good old house, while my house will keep me." And that's basically Scottish for fuck off. But it's a nice way of saying fuck off, because she's basically saying, I pay for my house from the king and from the Scottish king. Remember, this is at the time where Edward is saying, "David, you ain't no good king." And David's saying, "I'm a fucking great king. How dare you?" And so she's saying, I pay my fee to the Scottish king, who's legitimate, and therefore I keep my legitimacy of my house. And so when she said this, he then was like, right, fine, if you ain't gonna listen, I'm gonna chuck boulders at you. So he got a catapult and started catapulting boulders over the ramparts. And she did the sassiest thing I've ever heard about in the whole of warring history. But basically, when he'd run out of boulders, she told her ladies in waiting to go out and dust the ramparts with their kerchiefs, like basically like bigger than handkerchiefs, the things that you put around your shoulders, and just be like, "Oh, look at this, the dust on here is just a disgrace," and just kind of minimize the efforts that he'd made. And the whole way through this siege, you'll see this, that it's basically like two very strong leaders just having like full-on sass with each other. Like, it's a sassmafras or something. We have to have a word for this, because it's like the absolute shenanigans that went on in this siege were just excellent. Basically, when William Montagu realized, well, that definitely didn't work, he could lean on a very smart thing that he'd done for his next port of call when it came to sieging. So he didn't show up with just soldiers. He showed up with engineers and like proper carpenters, which means you don't have to basically shift a forest to go and siege someone. It means that you just start mowing down the forest that they have and use it to build the structures that you need to actually siege the person. Clever, right? So their first catapulting didn't work. So what did they do next? They built a sow. And a sow is basically this massive tower structure that means that you can climb up and bypass the ramparts and all the defensive structures that the castle has. So they built this thing, they push it up against the walls, and obviously takes a while, right? So Agnes is stood there noticing. She spotted the plan. She's like, I can see this ginormous tower structure that you're building. I'll warn you, ain't gonna work, ain't gonna work. And what she said is much prettier than ain't gonna work, brah. But she said, beware Montagu, or beware Montagu, for fallow shall they sow. Which is basically her saying like, dude, that I can see what you're doing. Like, we got a plan, like we're prepared. Because the second that they put the big sow up against the ramparts, Montagu seemed to have forgotten that he just like flung over a load of massive boulders with a catapult. Like, he did them a favor, because now they have huge boulders that they can just push over the ramparts and completely destroy this enormous wooden tower that's full of British and English soldiers, right? Bit of foresight would help there, William. But then she said, as the English were literally scattering out of this massive tower structure, she said, behold of the little English pigs. Like, I don't know, like that seems like, William, you had a great idea with bringing engineers, but you just like, you mucked up on that one. So William Montagu, who was the Earl of Salisbury, definitely didn't feel heartbroken over this and still had a sense of humor, which is great. But that's what I mean about this being a siege of sass, because a Scottish archer fired an arrow from the top of the ramparts and it hit a soldier who was next to the Earl. So this was right next to William. So instead of being like, oh, and kind of admitting that he felt a wee bit scared, he said to his forces, There comes one of my lady's tire pins. Agnes's love shafts go straight to the heart. So he's kind of, you know, making it jovial that like the guy just next to him has been killed. So like I really appreciate that they're kind of keeping it lighthearted, but at the same time I'm like, dude, you could just like see that you're not gonna win this one. But then William comes up with a plan to bribe the guy who works at the gate. So basically the front entrance, he goes up to the bouncer and he's like, I'll give you some money if you like leave it unlocked. And so the bouncer's like, yeah, sure, bruh. I'll do that. Give me the cash. And so he does. He indeed leaves it unlocked in a way that, you know, means that they can like get in. But he goes and tells Agnes, you know, because it takes a while to gather all your men. So he's like, takes the bribe, goes off to Agnes to that. Look, lassie, this is the Englishman's plan. What are we going to do? Then he goes back and he's like at the gate, left it unlocked. They can see that it's wide open. Portcullis is up, so the big, dangerous, large, heavy, weighty thing is up, so they can just walk in if they want to. But then when William's men show up, at first William is in front, right? He's leading. He's the big, confident Earl of Salisbury at the front, showing off his pride and ignorance. But then one of the other soldiers like rushes him at front, is like, I don't know, has an ego spurt or something and goes first. And Agnes's plan is to drop the portcullis. So she drops the portcullis, which traps the front soldier in like the territory of the castle. So he's like locked behind this massive heavy portcullis, where they were hoping to get a William. They were trying to get the Earl of Salisbury. They're like, nah, we'll take one of your soldiers. And then when William dashes back to his camp, he's like, all right, retreat, guys. They thought a plan. He seems to just like not understand that she can see everything that they're planning to do, and like, yeah, he seems to like consistently underestimate her. So when William's men are running away, she calls out to them and she says, farewell, Montague. I intended you should have supped with us and assist us in defending the castle against the English. So basically what she's saying to him is, dude, you are such a hypocrite. You are a Scotsman. You should also be defending Scotland against the English, but in like a back-chatty way with total sass. So he's like, okay, the engineering structures didn't work, the bribery didn't work. The only thing that we can do is just surround them on three sides, because one side of Dunbar Castle is just water. It's just, there is no surrounding unless you have boats, and he certainly didn't. So he was just surrounding them. He was like, okay, we're going to wait them out and just starve them out, which is actually a really good war tactic. Great idea. Agnes's brother John was captured by the English, and at this point he was co-regent. So him and his dad Thomas and John were both co-regent at the time, and they were captured by the English. And so William Montague goes like and brings the captured brother to the castle. So in front of the castle, like, nah. And he's like, if you don't surrender your castle, Agnes, I'm gonna hang your brother. And she goes, well, he's childless, so I'm the heir to the land if you kill him. So I come into a shit ton of land. So then he's like, well, that doesn't work. So then he didn't kill him. Actually, in the end, interestingly enough, he was traded. So Patrick, the 9th Earl of Dunbar and March, was the governor of Berwick in the 1330s when it was taken by the English. And later in the war, they ended up having to give it back to Scotland. And at that time, they traded brother John, so Agnes's brother, for the Earl of Salisbury. So William Montague got traded, like prisoner exchanged, for the brother that he threatened to hang, which I think is hilarious. So after they were in this situation where they'd had the supplies cut off, so basically they're being starved out by William Montagu, and they're surrounded on three sides, but they have this one side which has a semi-submerged back entrance to the castle. Agnes manages to get a letter out to Edinburgh, and Sir Alexander Ramsay in Edinburgh gathers 40 men and brings loads of supplies and just comes through the back of the castle, the waterways, because Montagu just hadn't thought of that. So in the end, what happened was that Alexander's men just rushed through the castle and pushed William Montagu's men back, which caused William Montagu's men, the Earl of Salisbury, to surrender. And so the siege ended on the 10th of June in 1338. That was it. It was over. But what I really like about it is that when they were pushed back, Agnes had sent a message, and that message was with bread and wine to kind of show the fact that they had plenty of resources, and she was kind of inviting them to come and dine with them. So even at the end, even when she won, there was just this level of like sassiness. In the end, she didn't have any heirs except for her nephews, so she had 3 nephews. But weirdly, none of her land inheritance went to her niece, which I don't really understand. Maybe that's something to do with, like, you know, a good old friend sexism. But her niece is also a really interesting person. And so the reason that we call Black Agnes Agnes Randolph and not Agnes Dunbar, even though her husband was the Earl of Dunbar, it's because Agnes had a ward who was actually her niece. And her niece was Agnes Dunbar because her niece was the great-granddaughter of Patrick Dunbar, the 7th Earl of Dunbar. And she was the daughter of Agnes Randolph's sister, Isabel. So that's why we call her Agnes Randolph, not Agnes Dunbar, because her niece was Agnes Dunbar. And her niece is also really fascinating. She's worth a look up. She was the intended wife of the king, but then ended up being his mistress. She's dead interesting. But anyway, that's why we call her Agnes Randolph and not Agnes Dunbar. And yeah, in total, the cost of the siege and the defending of it was £6,000 at the time, which in today's money is 4.8 to 9 million pounds. So it was expensive, but I hope all the sass was worth it because it's definitely worth the history.